Hello, and welcome to this peaceful space, a sanctuary where the whispers of the past are woven into a soft blanket of words to comfort you into sleep. I am so glad you have chosen to rest here tonight. As you settle in, if the sound of this story begins to calm your mind, please consider supporting this channel. A gentle like, a quiet subscription helps this garden of history grow. And as you drift away, I would love to know you are listening from across the world. Perhaps when you wake, you could leave a small comment telling me what country you are in and what the hour was for you as you fell asleep. It is a lovely thought, a community of dreamers connected by time and story. And now, let us begin. Find your most comfortable position. Let your eyes close. Feel the weight of your body sinking into your bed. Listen to the rhythm of your own breath. And allow my voice to become your guide on a journey back through time. Our story does not begin with a bang, nor with a flash of light, but in the deep, enduring quiet of a Polish winter. It begins in the city of Warsaw in the year 1867, a city under a heavy gray sky, its streets muffled by snow, its spirit suppressed by foreign rule. And in a small, unassuming apartment on Noah Lipke Street, a child is learning the shape of the world. Her name is Maria Salomia Skłodowska. The first quality of this child, the one that defined her from the very beginning, was her capacity for a profound and intense silence. This was not a simple absence of noise. It was a silence of deep focus, a gathering of all her mental faculties into a single, bright point of concentration. When little Maria, or Manya as she was called, read a book, the world around her did not just fade, it ceased to exist. The political anxieties of her partitioned homeland, the whispered conversations of the adults about czars and censors, the very sounds of the city outside her window, all of it dissolved into a distant hum. In these moments, she was building a fortress inside her mind, a place built not of stone and mortar, but of facts, of numbers, of the elegant logic of mathematics, and the captivating mysteries of physics. Her father, W. Ladislaw, was a teacher of these very subjects, and her mother, Bronislawa, was the head mistress of a girls' school. Their home, though not wealthy, was rich with the quiet treasures of learning. The walls were lined with bookshelves that sagged under the weight of knowledge. There were glass-fronted cabinets containing philosophical and scientific instruments, a brass microscope, a delicate scale, geometric models, objects that to young Maria were not mere decorations, but portals to understanding the hidden workings of the universe. Let us picture her there on a crisp afternoon, the light from the window a pale, wintry gold. She is a small figure with unusually bright, serious eyes and hair the color of ripe wheat neatly braided. She sits at a large table, a book on mathematics open before her. It is a book meant for students much older than her, but her small finger traces the equations without hesitation. She is not just reading, she is absorbing, internalizing. She is constructing a world where everything has its reason, its place, its predictable outcome. In a world where the political reality of Poland was chaotic and unjust, this internal world of order and logic was her sanctuary. It was her first and most important lesson, that while the world outside could be taken away, the world inside her mind, built on the foundation of knowledge, was hers alone, and it was impregnable. But life, even in a fortress of the mind, has a way of introducing sorrow. It came first in the form of illness, a grim and frequent visitor in those times. Her eldest sister, Sophia, whom she adored, contracted typhus and died. The vibrant, loving presence was suddenly gone, leaving a cold, silent void in the apartment. The family's grief was a thick, heavy fog. Then, just 2 years later, a deeper, more profound loss followed. Her strong, intelligent, and graceful mother, Bronislawa, succumbed to tuberculosis, a disease that wasted her away slowly, cruelly. Maria was only 10 years old. The loss of her mother was a seismic event, a crack in the foundation of her world. The comforting scent of her mother's perfume was replaced by the smell of disinfectant. The sound of her soft voice was replaced by a coughing silence. This double sorrow did not break Maria. Instead, it tempered her spirit, forging a resolve of incredible strength. She learned, in those bleak days, the discipline of endurance. She saw that grief was not something to be vanquished, but something to be carried, a weight that became a part of you. She learned to channel the chaotic energy of sadness into the steady, purposeful flow of work. Work became her solace, her prayer, her way of navigating a world that could be so randomly cruel. She would bury herself in her studies with a new ferocity, the pages of her books becoming a landscape where she could outrun the shadow of loss. She graduated from high school at the top of her class, her brilliance undeniable. A small, quiet flame burning all the brighter in the surrounding darkness. But here, a new wall rose before her, the great University of Warsaw, the natural next step for a mind of such caliber, had its doors firmly locked to women. It was a simple, brutal, and institutional fact. Her dreams of formal higher education were like birds with clipped wings, beating against the unyielding glass of prejudice and tradition. The frustration for a spirit like hers must have been a quiet, burning agony, yet despair was not an option she would entertain. She and her elder sister, Bronislawa, named for their mother, devised a pact, a beautiful and practical scheme of mutual support. They would take turns. Maria would work as a governess, a respectable but often lonely profession, saving every possible coin to send Bronislawa to Paris to study medicine. Then, once Bronislawa was established as a doctor, she would, in turn, fund Maria's education. And so, for years, Maria worked. She became a governess for a family in the countryside, the Shuki district, far from the intellectual stimulation of Warsaw. The work was often monotonous, teaching children who did not share her fierce passion for knowledge. The isolation could be profound. But it was here, in the deep, pastoral silence of the Polish countryside, that a different kind of awakening occurred. It was not in a grand lecture hall, but in a small, makeshift laboratory belonging to a cousin who was a chemist. He allowed her, this serious young woman with the hungry mind, to conduct simple experiments. And here she fell in love, not with a person, but with a process, with the tactile reality of science. Picture her in that small room, the air smelling of chemicals and old wood. She holds a beaker, feeling the cool, smooth glass against her skin. She carefully measures a crystalline powder, watching it dissolve in a clear liquid, creating a reaction that was both predictable and magical. She lights a Bunsen burner, the blue flame humming a soft, focused song. This was not just reading about science in a book. This was doing it. This was touching the mysterious, invisible forces that governed the universe. It was a quiet, profound, and deeply personal epiphany. It was the moment the abstract concepts in her books became real, tangible, something she could manipulate and question directly. The flame, the fizz of a reaction, the precise measurement. It was a new language, and she was finally learning to speak it with her hands. Finally, after years of patience and sacrifice, the day arrived. It was 1891. Maria was 24 years old. Her sister Bronislawa was now a doctor in Paris, and the long-awaited letter of invitation and support had arrived. With her savings carefully sewn into the lining of her coat, with a small, sturdy trunk containing her few possessions, mostly books, she boarded a train. For 4 long days and nights, she traveled across the vastness of Europe. She watched the familiar landscapes of Poland, the flat fields and dark forests, give way to the rolling hills, and then the grand, bustling cities of Germany, and finally to France. She was leaving behind the gray skies of her homeland for the gaslit, dream-filled boulevards of Paris. She arrived at the Gare du Nord, a small, weary figure amidst the chaos of the great city. She enrolled at the world-renowned Sorbonne, and in her registration documents, in a quiet act of transformation, she Frenchified her name. Maria became Marie. A new life, a new identity was beginning. Now let us return to Paris in the autumn of 1891. Let us follow Marie as she steps out of the noisy station and into her new life of Paris was not initially the city of romance and light of storybooks. To the newly arrived Marie, it was a cacophony of sounds and a blur of hurried movement. The language, which she had studied from books, was now a rapid, swirling torrent of sound all around her. Difficult to grasp, she was painfully shy, and her accented French marked her as an outsider. But beneath the surface anxiety, there was a steady, thrilling undercurrent of purpose. She had arrived. Her first home was a tiny sixth-floor garret room at 11 Rue des Feuillantines, in the Latin Quarter near the Sorbonne. It was a room that spoke of profound poverty, but to Marie, it was a citadel of independence. Let us imagine it with her. The room was under the sloping eaves of the building, with a single small window that looked out over a sea of gray rooftops and chimney pots. The floor was bare wood, with cracks that let in the chill. In one corner stood a narrow iron bedstead with a thin, lumpy mattress. A small, rickety table served as her desk, and a single wooden chair was her only other furniture. A small iron stove provided minimal heat, and for light, she had a single oil lamp. The winter that year was particularly bitter. The cold in that garret was a living presence, a sharp-toothed creature that seeped through the window frame and up from the floorboards. Marie would sit at her table to study, wrapped in every piece of clothing she owned. She would take the one blanket from her bed and drape it over her shoulders like a shawl. Her breath plumed in the air in the small circle of light cast by her lamp. She developed a routine for when the cold became too much to bear. She would stop, stand up, and pace the tiny room 7 steps to the far wall, 7 steps back, slapping her arms against her body to stir her circulation. The sound of her boots on the bare wood was a dull, rhythmic echo in the silence. She would focus on the physics problems in her mind, the elegant dance of forces and particles, and for a time, the intellectual fire within her would provide a warmth that the feeble stove could not. Her diet was a study in asceticism. She lived on bread, butter, and tea. She would buy a long, thin baguette and carefully apportion it for the entire week, sometimes allowing herself a treat of a few squares of chocolate or a piece of fruit. The hunger was a constant, gnawing companion, a low hum in the background of her consciousness. But she saw it not as a hardship, but as a necessary sacrifice. Every skipped meal, every shivering night, was another coin saved for books, another hour earned for study. She was building her future, and the mortar was her own formidable will. Now, let us follow her on her daily walk to the Sorbonne. She is a slight, swift figure moving through the animated streets of the Latin Quarter. She wears a dark, practical dress and coat, her hair pinned neatly under a simple hat. She does not linger at the colorful shop windows, displaying warm pastries or stylish clothes. Her eyes are fixed ahead or cast downward, her mind already in the lecture hall. Her leather satchel, worn smooth with use, is heavy with textbooks and notebooks filled with her precise, dense script. The sound of her footsteps is lost in the city's symphony, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the calls of the street vendors selling their flowers and newspapers, the general murmur of 1,000 lives. But she moves through it all as if in a protective bubble of silence, an island of intense, single-minded concentration. Inside the Sorbonne, the world transforms. The grand lecture amphitheater is a vast, echoing space that smells of old wood, chalk dust, and the faint, oily scent of the gas lamps that illuminate the professor's podium. She takes her customary seat in the very front row. She arranges her notebook, her pen, her inkwell with a quiet, meticulous ritual. Other students, mostly young men from comfortable backgrounds, file in around her, their chatter a low, buzzing hive of conversation. They glance at the serious, pale-faced young woman who always sat at the front, who never engaged in their banter. Some are curious, some are dismissive. She pays them no mind. They are phantoms, insubstantial next to the reality of the knowledge she is there to acquire. The professor enters. A hush falls, and then the lecture begins. For Marie, this is not merely a transfer of information. It is a sacred ritual, a revelation. She watches, mesmerized, as the professor's hands draw complex diagrams on the blackboard, the chalk clicking and scraping in a rhythm that is the music of reason. She listens to the explanations of thermodynamics, of the laws of motion, of the emerging, thrilling theories of electromagnetism. Her pen flies across the page, not transcribing verbatim, but capturing the essence, the logical flow, the beautiful, invisible architecture of the ideas. In these moments, she is no longer a poor Polish immigrant in a foreign land. She is a citizen of the Republic of Science, and her passport, earned through sheer brilliance and determination, is her formidable, undeniable intellect. It was this brilliance that could not go unnoticed. She finished first in her master's degree in physics in 1893. A year later, she finished second in her master's degree in mathematics. The quiet young woman from the garret was, by any academic measure, a star of exceptional brightness. It was this reputation that led a visiting Polish physicist to suggest she needed a proper laboratory to conduct her own research. He gave her a name, Marie Curie, And so, we arrive at the moment that would change everything. The day she walked into his laboratory. It was not a pristine, sterile place, but a practical, working space, cluttered and alive with the hum of inquiry. The air was thick with a melange of peculiar smells. The sharp, acrid tang of nitric acid, the sweet, ether-like scent of certain solvents, the clean, ozonic smell of electrical discharge. Shelves were lined with glass jars containing powders and crystals of various hues, deep blues, vibrant greens, dull ochres. Strange instruments of polished brass and blown glass sat on the wooden benches, their purposes mysterious and beautiful. And then he stood up from his workbench. Marie Curie. He was taller than she had expected, with a quiet, deliberate grace. He had a high, intelligent forehead, a thoughtful, gentle face, and a gaze that seemed to look both at her and through her, into the heart of the matter. His hands, as he greeted her, were long-fingered and sensitive, the hands of a man who could calibrate a delicate instrument to measure the faintest whisper of an electrical current. A man who understood the world through touch and precision. They began to talk. At first, it was the formal, careful language of science. He showed her the piezoelectric quartz electrometer he and his brother Jacques had invented, explaining with painstaking detail how it could measure infinitesimal electrical charges by using crystals that generated current under pressure. She listened, her mind grasping the intricate principles instantly. And then she began to ask questions. Not simple, polite questions, but deep, probing, incisive ones that went straight to the heart of the instrument's potential and its limitations. She spoke of her own work on the magnetic properties of hardened steel, and he saw immediately the clarity of her thought, the rigor of her methodology. The conversation, almost imperceptibly, began to shift. It moved from the specific technicalities to the philosophical underpinnings of their work. They spoke of the passion for discovery, the near spiritual need to understand the hidden mechanisms of the world, the belief that pure science was one of the highest pursuits of humanity. Pierre, a man who had long believed his work and his solitude were his only true companions, found himself speaking more freely, more personally than he ever had before. He found in Marie not just a keen intellect, but a kindred spirit, a person whose internal world burned with the same fierce, steady fire as his own. He would later describe the feeling as a kind of resonance, like two tuning forks, when struck, humming at the same perfect frequency, each amplifying the other's essential song. In his diary, he wrote of that first meeting. It was as if a door I had not known was closed had been opened, letting in a clear and steady light. Their courtship was not one of grand gestures or dramatic professions of love. It was built in the quiet of the laboratory, over shared apparatus and scribbled calculations. It was built on long walks through the Jardin des Plantes, where they discussed the future of physics, the plight of Poland, their shared dream of a life lived in purposeful pursuit of truth. Pierre saw in Marie not a woman to be placed on a pedestal, but a partner to stand beside as an absolute equal. He understood, as few men of his time did, that her mind was not a supplement to her being. It was the very core of it. He proposed to her not with a ring, but with a question, a proposition for a shared life of the mind. He told her, his voice filled with a quiet certainty, "It would be a beautiful thing, a thing I dare not hope for, to pass through life together, hypnotized in our dreams, your dream for your country, our dream for humanity, our dream for science." Marie, ever practical, deeply in love, and clear-eyed about her own priorities, agreed. But she insisted on one condition: they would be married in a simple civil ceremony, with no gold ring, no traditional white dress. She asked that the money that would have been spent on such things be used to purchase 2 sturdy, practical bicycles. For her, those bicycles were not just machines. They were powerful symbols of freedom, of partnership, of the parallel journey they would take together, side by side, pedaling toward a shared horizon. And so, they were married, and on their wedding day, or soon after, they took those bicycles and rode out into the French countryside. Picture them, 2 slight, earnest figures on the winding, tree-lined roads, the dappled sun on their faces, the wind a gentle, persistent resistance. They would pack a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and fruit, and stop by a babbling stream or in a field dotted with red poppies. In these moments, the intense, focused scientists were gone. They were simply a young man and a young woman, laughing, talking, enjoying the simple, physical joy of movement and the profound, quiet peace of each other's company. They were storing up light and warmth, building a reservoir of shared happiness that would have to sustain them through the difficult, all-consuming, and physically demanding years of work that lay just ahead. A work that would begin with a mysterious glow, reported by a man named Becquerel. A glow that would consume their lives and change the world forever. And so, with the wind from their bicycle rides still a fresh memory in their hearts, and the warmth of the sun stored in their bones, Marie and Marie Curie returned to the city, to their work, and to the small, growing mystery that would soon eclipse all else. Their apartment was simple, their needs few, for their true world was not one of material possessions, but of the mind, a landscape of ideas they were building together. It was in this shared space, amid books and papers, that Marie first spoke to Pierre in greater depth about the phenomenon that had captured her imagination. the strange, spontaneous rays discovered by Henry Becquerel, emanating from the element uranium. She described how these rays, unlike any other known form of energy, seemed to come from within the atom itself, without the need for external stimulation, like light or heat. They could fog a photographic plate wrapped in black paper. They could ionize the air around them. It was a faint signal, a whisper from the very heart of matter, and it was almost entirely unexplored. Marie saw in this whisper a vast, uncharted territory, and she decided it would be the subject of her doctoral thesis. A bold ambition for a woman in any field, let alone in the rigid, male-dominated world of physics. Pierre, listening with his characteristic quiet intensity, immediately saw the significance. His own work on crystals and symmetry was set aside without a second thought. Her quest became their quest. The first necessity was a space to work. Pierre secured for her the use of a small, glass-walled shed adjacent to his own main laboratory. It was a miserable place, a forgotten storage room that offered little protection from the elements. In the summer, it became a stifling glass house, the air thick and unmovable, magnifying the Parisian sun until the very instruments were warm to the touch. In the winter, it was damp and bitterly cold, the drafts finding their way through a dozen invisible cracks, a space little better than the garret of her student days. But to Marie, it was a kingdom. It was hers. Here, she began her systematic investigation. She acquired samples of every element and mineral she could find. Her essential tool was the brilliant, delicate electrometer that Pierre and his brother had invented, a device so sensitive it could measure the faintest electrical current. Marie's genius was in her methodology. She realized that the Becquerel rays ionized the air, making it conduct electricity. By placing a sample of a substance between two metal plates, charging them, and then using the electrometer to measure how quickly the charge leaked away through the ionized air, she could get a precise, quantitative measure of the intensity of this strange emission. It was a way to listen to the whisper and give it a numerical value. She worked with methodical patience, testing one substance after another. Most were inert. Then, compounds of thorium also showed this activity. It was a new data point, but the real shock came when she tested a mineral called pitchblende, a dense, black ore mined from the Jochimsthal region, primarily for its uranium content. She prepared the sample, set up the electrometer, and watched. The needle on the instrument did not just shift, it swung wildly. She checked her equipment, recalibrated, and tested again. The result was the same. The activity of the pitchblende was vastly, impossibly stronger than that of pure uranium itself. This defied all logical explanation. If the activity came only from the known elements uranium and thorium, then the pitchblende should be only as active as the sum of its parts. But it was 4 times more active. The numbers did not lie. There was only one possible, breathtaking conclusion. The pitchblende must contain something else. A new chemical element, present in vanishingly small quantities, but possessing a power, a radioactivity, a word she herself coined to describe this phenomenon, far beyond anything known to science. Pierre, seeing the irrefutable data, felt a jolt of excitement that surpassed any he had known in his own research. The hunt was no longer just an interesting doctoral project. It was a pursuit of a phantom, a substance of unimaginable potency. They decided to work together to isolate it. What followed was a period of monumental, grueling, almost alchemical labor they managed to secure through diplomatic and academic connections. A donation of several tons of pitchblende, residue from the mines in Bohemia. It arrived in rough, heavy sacks, a dull, dark powder that stained everything it touched. Their method was one of brute force, systematic chemistry. They had to separate the pitchblende, component by component, testing each fraction for its radioactivity, following the trail of this mysterious substance. It was a process of endless dissolution, precipitation, filtration, and crystallization. The physical scale of the work was Herculean. The shed was filled with massive, bubbling cauldrons of material. Marie, who stood just over 5 feet tall, would spend hours stirring the boiling, corrosive brews with an iron rod nearly as tall as she was. Her face flushed with heat and effort. The fumes were acrid and choking, requiring the doors to be left open even in winter, filling the space with a damp, chemical chill. Their hands became raw, cracked, and burned by the acids they handled, and by the invisible rays themselves. They hauled sacks, broke down ore with hammers, and poured liquids from one vessel to another, day after day, month after month. It was work that belonged more to the realm of an industrial factory than to a scientific laboratory, a stark contrast to the delicate measurements of the electrometer. But in the midst of this brutal physicality, something magical began to happen. As they progressively purified their samples, concentrating the unknown element, the substances themselves began to emit a light. It was a soft, unearthly blue-green luminescence, a light that seemed to have no source, a light that persisted in the absolute dark. In the evenings, after a long, exhausting day, they would sometimes sit together in the darkened shed and simply watch the faint, persistent glow from their beakers and dishes. This beautiful, eerie light, a visible manifestation of the immense, hidden power within the atom, became their companion and their beacon. It was a promise, a reward for their superhuman effort. After years of this relentless work, in 1898, they felt confident enough to announce their discovery to the French Academy of Sciences. But they announced not one, but two new elements. The first, separated from the pitchblende with bismuth, they named polonium, after Marie's beloved, oppressed homeland. A silent, scientific tribute to a Poland that did not exist on any map. The second, which accompanied barium and glowed so mysteriously, they named radium, from the Latin word radius, meaning ray. The scientific world received the announcement with interest, but also with deep skepticism. To many, it was a claim without conclusive proof. To be believed, they needed to present a sample of the pure element. They needed to isolate radium itself. And so, for 4 more years, they continued their monumental task, processing more and more pitchblende, ton by grueling ton. The work was financed on a shoestring. They used their own meager salaries. They were constantly tired, often ill, their health undermined by the physical strain and the relentless, invisible bombardment of radiation they did not yet understand was harmful. But they were driven by a shared, unshakable purpose, a hypnotic dream from which they did not wish to awake. Finally, in 1902, after processing literally thousands of kilograms of ore, they achieved their goal. From nearly 10,000 pounds of pitchblende, they isolated 1 single decigram of radium chloride. It was a tiny amount, a white, crystalline powder that looked like ordinary salt, but in the darkness, it glowed with a persistent, beautiful, otherworldly light, a light that had been hidden within the earth for millennia, waiting for this moment, for this partnership to be revealed. Marie would later write that this sight, this faint, luminescent beacon in the dark of the shed, was one of the most beautiful memories of my life. It was the culmination of 4 years of back-breaking labor, a testament to a belief in an idea that no one else could see, a proof of existence wrested from the raw stuff of the earth itself. The world could no longer be skeptical. The reality of radium and the new science of radioactivity was now undeniably, brilliantly clear. The glow from that tiny sample was not merely a scientific curiosity. It was a beacon that announced a new age. The world, once skeptical, now turned its full attention to the couple in the shed. The accolades began to arrive, slowly at first, and then in a torrent. In 1903, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. The prize was shared 3 ways: to Henry Becquerel for his discovery of spontaneous radioactivity, and to Pierre and Marie Curie for their subsequent profound research on the phenomenon. Marie Curie became the first woman to ever receive a Nobel Prize. The letter from the Academy, however, had initially omitted her name, intending to honor only the two men. A pointed letter from Pierre, a man of quiet principle, ensured the error was corrected. Yet, the fame that followed was a peculiar kind of torment for them. They were private souls, ill-suited to the public glare, the banquets, the speeches, the endless curiosity. They accepted the prize, but overwhelmed by work and a deep-seated aversion to ceremony, they declined to travel to Stockholm for the official presentation. The prize money brought financial relief, and the fame brought Pierre a new, much-needed professorship at the Sorbonne, which came with the promise of a proper laboratory. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed their struggles were over. They could work in comfort, continue their research, and raise their two young daughters, Iron and Eve, in a stability Marie had never known in her own youth. They took a rare holiday, cycling once more through the French countryside, the simple joy of it a balm to their weary spirits. But this period of tranquility was devastatingly short-lived. On a rain-slicked Paris street on April 19, 1906, Marie Curie, his mind abstracted by the deep thoughts that always occupied him, stepped out into the Rue Dauphine and directly into the path of a heavy horse-drawn cart. He was killed instantly. The world for Marie shattered. The loss was absolute, an amputation of her very soul. Her partner, her scientific other half, the quiet anchor in her life, was gone. In her diary, she began to write letters to him, desperate, grieving missives sent into a void. "Pierre, my Pierre," she wrote, "you are there. I see you still, warm and alive, dressed in your favorite suit, and you are called away, taking your hat, going out. And then nothing. I put flowers on your coffin every morning." The weight of her despair was crushing, a physical pressure on her chest. For weeks, she moved through her life as a phantom, the color drained from the world, yet from the depths of that abyss, a terrible, steely strength emerged. The University of Paris, in an unprecedented move, offered her Pierre's chair as professor. She accepted. It was a decision born not of ambition, but of a determination to see their shared work continue, to build the laboratory he had been promised. On the day of her first lecture, she walked into the same amphitheater where she had once sat as a student, now filled with a curious and skeptical audience. She began not with a word of personal introduction or grief, but exactly at the point where Pierre's own lecture notes had ended. Her voice was low, steady, and devoid of emotion, a mask of pure intellect over an ocean of sorrow. She was the first woman to teach at the Sorbonne, and her inaugural lesson was not a celebration, but a continuation, a silent promise to the memory of her husband. She now bore the double burden of single motherhood, and leading a major research laboratory. She threw herself into the work with a ferocious intensity that worried her friends. The laboratory became her sanctuary, the one place where the memory of Pierre was most vividly alive. It was here, in 1910, that she achieved another monumental feat, the isolation of pure metallic radium, definitively characterizing it as a new element. This work led to a second, unprecedented honor, the 1911 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, awarded solely to her in recognition of her services to the advancement of chemistry by the discovery of the elements radium and polonium, by the isolation of radium, and the study of the nature and compounds of this remarkable element. She was, and remains, the only person in history to win Nobel Prizes in two different scientific fields. But even as she reached this pinnacle of professional acclaim, personal scandal struck. The French press revealed her affair with a married colleague, the physicist Paul Langevin, a former student of Pierre's. The newspapers vilified her with a misogynistic fury. She was called a foreign homewrecker, a Jewess, despite having no Jewish heritage, a woman who had betrayed the memory of her saintly husband. A mob gathered outside her home, threatening her and her children, forcing her to send them away and flee into hiding with a family friend. The very same Swedish Academy, swayed by the scandal, privately suggested she not come to accept her second prize. Her response was a masterpiece of defiant dignity. She went anyway, stating firmly to the president of the committee, "The prize has been awarded for the discovery of radium and polonium. I believe that there is no connection between my scientific work and the facts of private life." The scandal eventually faded, but it left a deep scar. Yet her work, as always, was her redemption. With the outbreak of World War I in 1914, she saw a practical, humanitarian application for her discovery. She recognized that X-ray machines could save countless lives on the battlefield by allowing surgeons to locate bullets, shrapnel, and broken bones deep within the body. With her typical relentless energy, she became a pioneer of battlefield radiology. She invented mobile X-ray units, which she called petites curies, or little curies. She convinced wealthy women to donate their cars, recruited and trained her daughter Iron and other women as radiographers, and often drove to the front lines herself, a slight, determined figure in a simple black coat, operating the machinery and instructing surgeons. She and her units are credited with treating over 1 million wounded soldiers. The beautiful, mysterious rays that had glowed in her shed were now, in her hands, a tool of mercy, a light that pierced the flesh to guide the healing hand. The war years took their toll, and the decades of exposure to radioactive materials began their slow, insidious work on her body. The burns on her fingers, once a temporary irritation, became chronic, painful lesions that refused to heal. She developed cataracts that clouded her vision, requiring multiple surgeries. A persistent, low tinnitus hummed in her ears. She was plagued by a profound, bone-deep fatigue that no amount of rest could alleviate. She stubbornly refused to acknowledge the danger, believing that the element she had discovered was fundamentally noble, that its benefits to humanity outweighed any minor personal risks. She traveled to the United States twice, in 1921 and 1929, to receive generous donations of gram-sized samples of radium for her research. Gifts from a nation of women who admired her. By the 1930s, her health was in clear decline. The radiation had damaged her bone marrow, the factory of her blood. She developed aplastic anemia, a rare and then untreatable condition. A final trip to a sanatorium in the clear, dry air of Passy in the French Alps failed to restore her. She died there on July 4, 1934. Her body was still radioactive, in a final, fitting testament to the power of her discovery. Her remains were placed in a lead-lined coffin. Decades later, in 1995, in a gesture of national atonement and recognition, the French government transferred her ashes and those of Pierre to the Pantheon in Paris. Marie Curie became the first woman to be entombed there based on her own merits. Her coffin, however, remains shielded by that inch of lead, a permanent, silent guardian against the enduring, powerful glow of her own legacy, a force she had unleashed upon the world, and which had, in the end, consumed her. The legacy of her work, however, did not die with her. It flourished in the institutions she built and in the minds she inspired, most notably in her eldest daughter, Iron. The Radium Institute in Paris, which Marie had directed, became a world center for nuclear physics and chemistry. Here, under the guidance of the woman they now called Madame Curie, a new generation of scientists was trained. And here, Iron Curie, alongside her husband Frédéric Joliot, continued the family tradition of groundbreaking discovery. In 1934, the very year of Marie's death, Iron and Frédéric made a discovery that was in many ways the final piece of the puzzle their parents had begun to assemble. They bombarded a thin sheet of aluminum with alpha particles and found that it continued to emit radiation even after the bombardment stopped. They had created a radioactive isotope from a stable element. They had achieved artificial radioactivity. For this work, which realized the alchemist's dream of transmutation and opened the door to the modern nuclear age, Iron and Frédéric Joliot Curie were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry In 1935, the Curie dynasty had secured its place in history, a testament to a mother who had raised not only a family, but a scientific lineage. But the element that had given Marie Curie everything, fame, 2 Nobel Prizes, a purpose, was also a silent, insidious murderer. For decades, she had handled radium and polonium with bare hands, carried tubes of radium salts in her apron pockets, and stored them in her desk drawer. She had marveled at their beautiful glow in the dark confines of her laboratory, little knowing that she was being bombarded by a force powerful enough to shatter the very atoms within her cells. The burns on her fingers, the cataracts that clouded her vision, the persistent fatigue that plagued her later years, these were not minor occupational hazards. They were the symptoms of acute radiation sickness. Her decades of exposure had irreparably damaged her bone marrow, the vital factory of her blood, leading to the aplastic anemia that ultimately killed her. In a cruel irony, the very tool she had used to save countless lives on the battlefield, the X-ray, whose principles were akin to the rays from her own elements, had also contributed to her demise, as she had never used any protective shielding during her work with the little Curies. The world she left behind was forever changed by her discoveries. The science of radioactivity, which she named and pioneered, became the foundation of modern physics, leading directly to the understanding of the nuclear atom, to cancer radiotherapy, to radiometric dating, and to both nuclear power and nuclear weapons. The glow from that shed illuminated a path that humanity is still walking. Her life became a symbol of intellectual triumph, of personal sacrifice, of a woman breaking through every barrier placed before her. Yet the true essence of Marie Curie lies not in the symbols, but in the relentless physical reality of her work. In the tons of pitchblende she stirred, in the raw, chapped skin of her hands, in the precise click of the electrometer in a silent, cold shed, and in the beautiful, deadly glow that she pursued with a single-minded passion that ultimately consumed her. She was a force of nature as fundamental as the radiation she discovered, and her story, like the elements she unearthed, continues to emit a powerful, enduring, and complex light. The world, now armed with the knowledge of the atom that Marie Curie had helped to unlock, began to grapple with the immense power and peril of radioactivity. The same properties that made radium a miracle cure in the public imagination, its ability to destroy tissue, were now being harnessed in a more targeted way. The field of radiation therapy for cancer, which had begun tentatively during Marie's lifetime, grew into a cornerstone of oncology. The Radium Institute became a global hub for this work, treating patients and training physicians in the techniques that used the Curie's discoveries to save lives. The gram of radium gifted to Marie by the women of America was not merely a symbol, it became a tool, its emissions carefully directed at malignant growths, offering hope where there had been none. Yet this benevolent application was shadowed by a growing awareness of the danger. The tragic fate of the radium girls, factory workers who painted watch dials with luminous radium paint and pointed their brushes with their lips, absorbing lethal doses, became a stark public lesson in the need for safety protocols that Marie herself had largely ignored, with fatal consequences. The science she pioneered did not stand still. The discovery of the neutron in 1932 and the subsequent work of scientists like Enrico Fermi, who bombarded elements with neutrons, created ever more radioactive isotopes. The path led inexorably to the revelation of nuclear fission in 1938. The atom, which Marie had proven was not solid and immutable, could be split. The energy contained within the nucleus, that vast reservoir of power hinted at by the intense activity of radium, was now within humanity's grasp to release. When the Second World War erupted, the implications were clear. Frédéric Joliot-Curie remained in occupied France, his work on chain reactions and his stock of heavy water becoming a focal point of resistance and espionage. In the United States, other scientists, many of them refugees, embarked on the Manhattan Project. The atomic bombs that ended the war were a direct, if horrifying, descendant of the research begun in that draughty shed. Marie Curie's pursuit of pure knowledge had ultimately yielded a force of unimaginable destructive power, a duality that would come to define the modern age. Meanwhile, the Curie legacy continued through iron, steely and intense, bearing a striking resemblance to her mother, both in appearance and in her fierce, uncompromising dedication to science. Iron and Frédéric led the French atomic energy program after the war. She fought for the peaceful use of atomic energy, even as the world entered the Cold War and the nuclear arms race accelerated. But the family's curse persisted. Iron, who had grown up playing in laboratories surrounded by radioactive samples, and who had herself handled polonium in her research, developed leukemia. She died in 1956 at the age of 58, a victim of the same invisible rays that had killed her mother. The second generation of Curie Nobel laureates was gone, their lives a testament to both transcendent intellectual achievement and profound personal sacrifice. The story of Marie Curie, however, extends far beyond the boundaries of her life and her immediate family. It is etched into the very fabric of science. Her relentless insistence on precise measurement set a new standard for experimental physics. Her discovery of two new elements demonstrated that the periodic table was not a closed book. Her intuition to follow the radioactivity, a property rather than a visual clue, revolutionized chemical analysis. Today, her influence is everywhere. In hospitals, radioactive isotopes are used for medical imaging and cancer treatment. In laboratories, radioactive dating unlocks the age of archaeological finds and geological formations. In our understanding of the universe, the principles of radioactivity are fundamental. And yet, the most powerful remnant of her story may not be scientific, but human. It is the image of a young woman, born into oppression and poverty, who through sheer force of intellect and will changed the world. She faced the disdain of the academic establishment, the venom of the popular press, the agony of personal loss, and the constant physical strain of her work. She faced it all without retreat, driven by a belief that the secrets of the natural world were worth any sacrifice. Her life stands as a permanent rebuttal to prejudice, a demonstration that genius is blind to gender, and that curiosity, when paired with courage, can illuminate the darkest of corners. The radium she discovered has long since decayed. Its intense glow faded, but the light of her example, fierce, unwavering, and brilliant, continues to shine, undimmed by the passage of time. The profound duality of radioactivity, its capacity to both heal and harm, to illuminate and destroy, became the central paradigm of the nuclear age that Marie Curie had unwittingly ushered in. In the decades following her death, the Radium Institute, which she had founded and led, continued to be a crucible of both groundbreaking research and medical application. The very building, its walls and materials, had become mildly radioactive from years of work with radium and polonium, a permanent, low-level testament to its history. Here, scientists who had trained under Madame Curie carried forward her meticulous methods, using the radioactive sources she had helped create to probe deeper into the structure of matter and to refine the techniques of radiation therapy. The gram of radium gifted by the American people was not merely a relic. It was a working tool, its emissions carefully calibrated and used to treat tumors, continuing the life-saving work she had championed during the war. The Institute became a living memorial, not in marble, but in ongoing experimentation, a place where the quest for knowledge she embodied continued in every measured click of a Geiger counter, and in every patient treated. This expansion of knowledge inevitably led to a more sobering understanding of the risks. The initial era of radium as a harmless, miraculous additive to toothpaste, face creams, and tonics came to a decisive end. The long, painful deaths of the radium girls in the United States and similar cases in watch-style painting studios elsewhere provided irrefutable epidemiological evidence of the element's lethality. When incorporated into the body, the same alpha particles that could target a cancer cell could, when emitted from radium deposited in bone, cause necrosis, horrific jaw infections, and fatal anemias. The scientific community, spurred by these tragedies, began to systematically develop the field of radiation safety. The principles of shielding, limited exposure time, and maximum distance, concepts Marie herself had largely disregarded in her single-minded pursuit, became fundamental tenets of laboratory and clinical practice. Lead aprons, thick glass screens, and remote handling tools became standard equipment. A direct and necessary response to the occupational hazards the Curies had first encountered. The political and geopolitical dimensions of their discovery also intensified. Frederick and Iron Joliet Curie's work on artificial radioactivity and the nuclear chain reaction placed them at the center of the emerging nuclear physics community. With the rise of the Nazis and the outbreak of World War II, their research took on urgent strategic importance. Frederick, remaining in France during the occupation, secretly moved the country's stock of heavy water, a key component in early nuclear reactor designs, and his own research documents into hiding, risking his life to prevent this crucial material from falling into Nazi hands. This act of scientific resistance highlighted a new reality. The physicist was no longer a secluded academic, but a potential player on the world stage. Their work a matter of national security. The subsequent development of the atomic bomb by the Allies, a project that leveraged the fundamental principles of nuclear fission, which the Curie's work had helped make possible, forever changed humanity's relationship with its own power. The glow from the shed in Paris had, within half a century, culminated in the blinding flash over Hiroshima, a chain of causality that forever linked pure scientific curiosity with the ultimate power of destruction. After the war, the Curie legacy, now carried by Iron and Frederick, shifted towards the pursuit of peaceful atomic energy and the management of its international implications. Iron, appointed as a director of the French Atomic Energy Commission, became a prominent advocate for the use of nuclear science for energy and medicine. Even as the superpowers embarked on a terrifying arms race, but the family's intimate, tragic connection with radiation persisted. Iron, who had been exposed to radioactive materials from her childhood in the laboratory, developed acute leukemia, the same disease that had afflicted the radium dial painters. Her death in 1956 marked the passing of the second generation, a somber reminder that the power they had unlocked exacted a personal toll. Her own Nobel Prize, shared with her husband, stood alongside her parents on the family mantle, a stunning collective achievement shadowed by profound loss. The story of Marie Curie, therefore, does not conclude with a simple eulogy. It radiates outward, its influence permeating countless aspects of the modern world. Her insistence on quantitative precision elevated experimental science. Her discovery of elements by their radioactivity introduced a powerful new tool for discovery. Her establishment of a major research institute created a pipeline for future genius. Today, her fingerprints are everywhere, in the cancer wards, where radiotherapy shrinks tumors, in the archaeological digs, where carbon-14 dating reveals the age of artifacts, in the power plants, where controlled fission provides electricity, and in the space probes, where radioactive thermoelectric generators provide power in the deep cold of the solar system. And yet, perhaps the most enduring resonance is more personal. It is the image of an indomitable human spirit, a woman who transcended the limitations of her gender, her nationality, and her poverty through the sheer, unassailable force of her mind. She was not a mythical figure, but a person of flesh and blood, who knew great love and devastating grief, who faced public vitriol and private exhaustion, and who never, ever ceased in her quest. Her laboratory notebooks, still too radioactive to be handled without protective gear, serve as a powerful metaphor for her life. They contain ideas of luminous brilliance, but they must be approached with caution, for they bear the permanent, active mark of the powerful and dangerous truths she pursued. Her legacy is not just in the elements she discovered, but in the example she set, a testament to the proposition that with enough passion, perseverance, and precision, a single human being can illuminate the darkness and forever change our understanding of the universe. The final years of Marie Curie's life were a paradox of towering acclaim and relentless physical decline. The very energy she had unlocked from the atom seemed to have been siphoned from her own body. By the early 1930s, the symptoms of prolonged radiation exposure were undeniable and debilitating. The chronic burns on her fingers had evolved into painful, weeping lesions that made delicate laboratory work a trial. Her vision, once sharp enough to read the faintest tremor of a needle on an electrometer, was clouded by cataracts that required multiple surgeries. A persistent, low-frequency humming, a tinnitus born of neural damage, became the constant background noise to her thoughts. She was plagued by a profound and unshakable fatigue, a weariness that sleep could not cure, the result of an aplastic anemia slowly starving her body of vital blood cells. Yet, her will remained indomitable. She continued to lead the Radium Institute, reviewing research, guiding her students, and fighting for funding with her characteristic tenacity. She traveled internationally to Madrid, Warsaw, and twice to the United States, not as a tourist, but as a standard bearer for science. The 1921 American trip, in particular, was a triumphal yet exhausting procession. Masterminded by journalist Missy Melanie, the campaign saw Marie gifted a single precious gram of radium by a nation of admiring American women, funded through countless small donations. President Warren G. Harding presented her with the golden key to the lead-lined casket containing the element in a White House ceremony. Yet, throughout the fanfare, she was a figure of immense fragility, her hands often gloved to hide the damage, her gaze shielded by dark glasses against the photophobia that now afflicted her. She returned to Paris, and the gram of radium became the core of her institute's therapeutic work. But her own health continued its irreversible descent. A second trip to America in 1929 secured another gram of radium for her beloved Radium Institute in Warsaw, a final gift to the homeland she had never ceased to love. This act of scientific patriotism, however, drained the last of her reserves. By 1932, she was noticeably weaker. She took a leave of absence from the Institute, hoping the clear, dry air of the sanatorium at Saint-Lemaus in Passy, high in the French Alps, would restore her. It was a forlorn hope. The radiation had done its work on her bone marrow, the factory of her blood. The aplastic anemia was now acute and untreatable. Her final days were spent in a simple room at the sanatorium, surrounded by her family, her daughter Eve, and occasionally iron. The fierce, focused mind was now trapped in a body that was failing system by system. She developed a high fever. On July 4, 1934, Marie Curie died. The official cause was listed as aplastic pernicious anemia, but the true cause was radium. The doctor noted that her bone marrow had not reacted to the disease, a classic sign of radiation damage. In a final, profound irony, the element to which she had dedicated her life, and which had brought her such fame, had also been her slow, secret poison. Her body, even in death, was not free from its influence. It was still radioactive. This radioactivity necessitated special precautions. She was buried in a simple coffin at the cemetery in Sceaux, next to Pier. But the story of her final resting place was not yet over. 60 years later, in a powerful act of national recognition and atonement for the prejudices she had faced. The French government decided to transfer her remains, and those of Pierre, to the Pantheon in Paris. This secular mausoleum is reserved for the nation's great men. On April 20, 1995, in a ceremony presided over by President François Mitterrand, Marie Curie became the first woman to be entombed in the Pantheon based on her own merits. Yet the power of her discovery still demanded respect. Her coffin and that of Pierre were each placed inside a second, lead-lined casket, a final shield against the persistent radioactivity that emanated from their remains, a silent, powerful testament to the literal, physical impact of their work, a force that transcended even death itself. The glow from the shed had not been extinguished. It had been institutionalized, memorialized in lead and marble, a permanent and ambiguous part of France's and the world's heritage. The legacy of Marie Curie could not, end with her interment in the Pantheon. It was far too active, too potent, too woven into the very fabric of 20th century science and society. The Radium Institute, which she had founded and built into a world-class center, continued its work, a living monument far more vibrant than any statue. Her daughter, Iron, and son-in-law, Frédéric Joliot-Curie, were now at the helm. And in a stunning continuation of the family narrative, they were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1935, the year after Marie's death, for their seminal discovery of artificial radioactivity. They had proven that stable elements could be transformed into radioactive ones by bombarding them with alpha particles. It was the realization of the ancient alchemist's dream of transmutation, but achieved through the precise tools of modern physics. This breakthrough opened the floodgates, where Marie had painstakingly extracted naturally occurring radioactive elements from tons of ore. Scientists could now create a vast array of radioactive isotopes in the laboratory, tailoring them for specific purposes in medicine, research, and industry. This power, however, cast an ever-lengthening shadow. The Joliot-Curie's work on the chain reaction was fundamental to the possibility of both nuclear reactors and atomic bombs. As the clouds of World War II gathered, Frédéric secretly secured France's supply of heavy water and his research notes, preventing them from falling into Nazi hands. The torch of knowledge, first lit in a humble shed, was now a matter of global security and survival. The subsequent Manhattan Project and the dawn of the nuclear age were direct, if terrifying, descendants of the Curie's relentless curiosity, the energy contained within the atom, whose existence Marie's work on radioactivity had first revealed in a sustained and measurable way, was now unleashed upon the world with a apocalyptic force. The beautiful, mysterious glow that had comforted her in the dark now had a twin. The blinding flash that illuminated the desert at Trinity and the skies over Hiroshima. The personal toll of this research continued to be exacted. Iron Joliet Curie, who had been exposed to radioactive materials from childhood, developed leukemia, just as the radium dial painters had. She died in 1956, the second generation of Nobel laureates in the family, claimed by the invisible rays they had dedicated their lives to understanding. It was a tragic reinforcement of the principle Marie herself had demonstrated. The laws of physics are impartial and unforgiving. They do not distinguish between a pioneering genius and an anonymous factory worker. Yet the benevolent applications of radioactivity, which Marie had championed so fervently, also flourished. The field of radiation oncology matured, saving millions of lives. Radioactive isotopes became indispensable tools in medical diagnostics, agricultural improvement, and industrial testing. The carbon-14 dating technique, developed by Willard Libby, revolutionized archaeology and geology, allowing scientists to precisely date organic materials. This technique, too, relied on the fundamental principles of radioactivity that Marie had helped to establish. Today, Marie Curie's presence is pervasive. It is in the hospital wards where radiotherapy treatments target cancerous cells with pinpoint accuracy. It is in the nuclear power plants that provide a significant portion of the world's electricity. A controversial but tangible legacy of the energy she first measured. It is in the space probes, like the Voyagers, powered by radioactive thermoelectric generators, carrying her influence to the edge of the solar system and beyond. Her name is immortalized in the Curie CI, a unit of radioactivity, and on universities, institutes, and scholarships across the globe. But beyond the prizes, the units, and the institutions, the most enduring aspect of her story is the archetype she became, the scientist, as a hero of pure intellect and uncompromising integrity. She demonstrated that monumental achievement is born from a combination of visionary intuition and backbreaking labor. She proved that gender is no barrier to genius. Her life stands as a permanent testament to the power of a focused mind to change the world, for better and for worse. Her laboratory notebooks, her papers, even her cookbook, remain too radioactive to be handled safely, stored in lead-lined boxes. They are a perfect, poignant metaphor for her legacy, brilliant, transformative, but bearing a permanent, active charge that demands respect and careful handling. The light she uncovered in the darkness of her shed continues to shine, illuminating both our greatest possibilities and our most profound responsibilities. Of course, the story of Marie Curie is finite, as all human lives are, but its echoes are infinite. While the chronological narrative of her breath and heartbeat has been told, the reverberations of her work and spirit continue to unfold even in our present day. A ripple effect that has no true end. We can trace these ripples a little further. The Curie bloodline and scientific lineage extended beyond iron. Her younger daughter, Eve Curie, did not become a scientist, but carved her own remarkable path as a writer, journalist, and diplomat. She authored the seminal biography, Madame Curie, which became an international bestseller and shaped the world's perception of her mother for generations. During World War II, she was a passionate advocate for the Free French forces and later served as a UNESCO diplomat, championing the same universal ideals of knowledge and progress that her parents had embodied. The legacy here was not in a laboratory, but in the power of narrative and international cooperation. The Radium Institute, renamed the Curie Institute, evolved into one of the world's leading centers for cancer research and treatment. The very element that caused Marie's death became, in safer, controlled hands, a key weapon in fighting the disease. The Institute stands as a living paradox, a place where the cause of a problem and its solution are studied under the same roof, a direct continuation of Marie's belief in science as a force for human good. Furthermore, the spirit of the little Curies from World War I evolved into the entire field of nuclear medicine. Today, diagnostic tools like PET scans rely on radioactive tracers, and targeted radionuclide therapy delivers radiation directly to cancer cells. Concepts that are the grandchildren of her initial revolutionary ideas. The ethical questions she inadvertently raised have also multiplied. The nuclear age, born from the science she pioneered, has left humanity grappling with the permanent challenges of radioactive waste disposal, the existential threat of nuclear weapons, and the complex safety calculations of nuclear power. Every debate about a nuclear plant, every non-proliferation treaty, every effort to secure fissile material is a conversation happening in the long shadow of her discovery. She unlocked a fundamental force of the universe, and with it, handed humanity a permanent, double-edged responsibility. And so, while we can say that the story of Marie Curie, the woman, is complete, the story of Curie, the phenomenon, is not. It is present in every student, particularly every young woman who looks at a career in STEM and sees in Marie a pioneer who cleared the path. It is present in the quiet hum of an MRI machine and in the intense debate over clean energy. Her life became a permanent part of the human constellation, a fixed point of reference for courage, intellect, and the bittersweet truth that profound knowledge often comes with an equally profound cost. The final, silent glow of the radium in its lead casket at the Pantheon is a perfect symbol, a light that is contained, but never truly extinguished, its energy and its story forever a part of our world. If you wish, we could continue this journey of historical stories for sleep with another figure. The life of Leonardo da Vinci, with his endless sketches and quiet observations, or of Galileo gazing at the stars, could be our next peaceful exploration. The choice is yours. For now, the story of Marie Curie rests,